The grand hall smelled of polish and old money. Beeswax rubbed into ancient wood until it gleamed like dark honey, mingling with the sharp citrus of the cleaning solutions I'd been using since dawn. My knees ached from scrubbing the stone floors, but I didn't dare slow down. Not today. Not when the Alpha King's son was returning from his studies abroad, and the entire estate buzzed with an energy that felt electric and dangerous. I was invisible here. That was the point. My pale blonde hair was tied back in a severe bun, hidden partially beneath the plain gray scarf all servants wore. My uniform was shapeless, designed to erase any hint of identity or individuality. Just another maid. Just another faceless body moving through the corridors of power, keeping the machine running while staying carefully out of sight. The other servants whispered about Prince Dominic's arrival, with a mixture of excitement and dread. He was 24, they said. Brilliant. Arrogant. Handsome in the way that powerful wolves often were. All sharp lines and barely contained violence. He'd been away for 3 years, learning diplomacy and strategy at the European courts, and now he was coming home to take his place at his father's right hand. I'd been working at the royal estate for 6 months, and I'd perfected the art of being nobody. It was survival. It was safety. It was the only way someone like me could exist in a world like this. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the floor I'd just finished. I was exhausted. I'd been up since 4, preparing the prince's chambers, ensuring every surface sparkled. Every detail was perfect. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Thornberry, had made it clear that any mistake today would result in immediate dismissal. I couldn't afford that. I needed this job. I needed the anonymity it provided. The sound of cars pulling up the gravel drive made my stomach tighten. He was here. I grabbed my bucket and rags, intending to disappear into the servants' corridors, but Mrs. Thornberry appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes finding me instantly. You. Stay and finish the windows in the east corridor. The prince will be using that route to his chambers. Her voice was clipped, brooking no argument. My heart sank, but I nodded. Yes, ma'am. She vanished, leaving me alone in the suddenly too quiet hall. I worked quickly, methodically, trying to finish before the entourage arrived. The east corridor was long, lined with portraits of previous Alpha Kings, their painted eyes seeming to follow my movements. I'd always felt watched here, even when I was alone. This house held too much history, too much power. It pressed down on everything, including the servants who kept it running. I was halfway through the third window when I heard them, voices echoing up from the main entrance, the deep rumble of male laughter, the crisp tones of authority. They were coming this way. I pressed myself against the wall, making myself as small as possible, eyes down. That was the rule. Never make eye contact with the family. Never draw attention. Be furniture. Be air. The group rounded the corner, 6 or 7 wolves, all radiating dominance, their expensive clothes and confident strides marking them as elite. And in the center, commanding every eye without even trying, was Prince Dominic. He was taller than I'd expected, broader through the shoulders. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar in a way that suggested he didn't care about propriety. His jaw was sharp enough to cut, his eyes a startling amber that seemed to glow even in the natural light. He wore his power like a second skin, comfortable and absolute. I held my breath as they approached, keeping my gaze fixed on the baseboards. They were discussing politics, border disputes with the northern pacts, their voices casual but carrying an undercurrent of steel. These were not men who asked for things. They took them. I thought they would pass without noticing me. I was good at being invisible, but then someone, one of the prince's companions, a broad-shouldered wolf with a cruel mouth, said something that made the group laugh. And in his amusement, his shoulder bumped mine as he passed. I stumbled slightly, my cleaning rag falling to the floor. "Watch it," the wolf snarled, his good humor evaporating instantly. "Clumsy bitch." "I'm sorry," I whispered, dropping immediately into a deeper bow, reaching for the fallen rag, but I wasn't fast enough. The prince's boot connected with my side. It wasn't a full kick, just a dismissive shove, really, the way you'd move an object out of your path. But it was hard enough to send me sprawling, my bucket tipping, sudsy water spreading across the pristine floor I'd just cleaned. Pain bloomed in my ribs, sharp and immediate, but I'd felt worse. So much worse. I stayed down, waiting for them to pass, for this humiliation to end. Pathetic, someone muttered. More laughter. They moved on, their voices fading down the corridor, leaving me alone on the wet floor, my uniform soaked, my dignity in tatters. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just breathed through the ache in my side, through the familiar burn of shame and anger that I'd learned to swallow years ago. This was nothing. This was survival. But something in me, something I'd buried deep and kept locked away, stirred at the casual cruelty of it, at the assumption that I was nothing, that I deserved to be kicked aside like debris. They had no idea what I was, what I'd been, what I'd survived, and that was exactly how I needed to keep it. I pulled myself up slowly, wincing at the tenderness in my ribs. Nothing broken, just bruised. I'd had worse from training sessions that had lasted hours, from fights that had left me bleeding and triumphant on blood-stained mats in places these pampered wolves couldn't even imagine. I cleaned up the spilled water, refilled my bucket, and finished the windows with mechanical precision. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping everything locked down, keeping the muscle memory from taking over, keeping myself from being anything other than what they expected, a maid, a nobody, a thing to be kicked aside. That night, in the servants' quarters, the other maids chattered about the prince's return. How handsome he was, how commanding, how they hoped to catch his eye, earn his favor, maybe even, they giggled, warm his bed. I said nothing, lying on my narrow cot in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. My roommate, Petra, a plump woman in her 40s who'd worked here for decades, rolled over to face me. "You were in the corridor when they arrived, weren't you?" she asked softly. I didn't answer. I heard what happened. Her voice was gentle, pitying. "Don't take it personally, dear. That's just how it is. We're beneath their notice. Better to be invisible than to be seen." "I know," I whispered. But even as I said it, I felt the old instincts stirring. The training I'd received in another life, in another world, before everything had fallen apart, before I'd lost everything and had to disappear into this gray existence. I'd been someone once, someone dangerous, and I would be again if I had to. But not yet. Not here. Not unless I had no choice. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my body remembered too much. The exact angle of the kick, the weight distribution, the vulnerability of the person who delivered it, thinking I was helpless. In the darkness, my lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The next morning, I was assigned to clean the prince's private study. It was a test, I knew. Mrs. Thornberry was watching me, waiting to see if yesterday's incident had broken my spirit, if I'd quit and save her the trouble of firing me. But I showed up early, my uniform crisp despite the yellowing bruise blooming beneath it, my face carefully neutral. The study was magnificent, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk of dark wood, leather chairs that probably cost more than I'd earn in a year. Everything smelled of tobacco and old paper, and that particular scent that powerful wolves carried, something wild and untamed beneath the civilized veneer. I worked silently, dusting shelves, emptying the trash, straightening papers without reading them. I was almost finished when the door opened. Prince Dominic walked in, still in his running clothes, sweat dampening his shirt, his hair tousled. He looked younger like this, less like a prince, and more like a man who'd just pushed his body to its limits. He didn't look at me, just moved to his desk, rifling through papers, his attention elsewhere. I should have left. Should have slipped out while he was distracted. But then he spoke. "You're the maid from yesterday." His voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of the roughness that marked him as wolf. I froze, halfway to the door. "Yes, Your Highness. Look at me." It was a command, not a request. I turned slowly, keeping my eyes downcast even as I faced him. I said, "Look at me." I raised my eyes, meeting that amber gaze directly for the first time, and something shifted in the air between us. He studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, his head tilting slightly as if I were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. I kept my face blank, my body language submissive, but inside, every instinct I'd ever developed was screaming at me to assess, to calculate, to prepare. "What's your name?" he asked. "Celeste, Your Highness." "Celeste," he repeated, as if testing how it felt in his mouth. "French?" My mother liked the sound of it. The truth, though not all of it. He was silent for a long moment, still watching me with that unnerving focus. Then, to my shock, he said, "I apologize for yesterday. That was beneath me." The words hung in the air between us, so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't process them. An alpha prince didn't apologize to servants. It simply wasn't done. "It's not necessary, Your Highness," I managed, my voice steady despite my confusion. "Perhaps not," he agreed, "but I'm doing it anyway. You may go." I left quickly, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the sudden, terrifying realization that I'd been seen. Not as furniture, not as a thing to be kicked aside, as a person, and that was far more dangerous than being invisible had ever been. The days that followed were strange and unsettling in ways I couldn't fully articulate, even to myself. Prince Dominic didn't summon me again, but I felt his presence like a weight pressing against my consciousness. The estate seemed smaller somehow, as if his return had compressed all the space, made every corridor feel like it might lead to an encounter I wasn't prepared for. I kept my head down, and my routine unchanged. Up at 4, morning prayers whispered in the cold darkness of the servants' quarters, then straight to work. I cleaned the family wing, the guest chambers, the library, anywhere Mrs. Thornberry sent me. I was efficient, invisible, exactly what they needed me to be. But I couldn't shake the memory of those amber eyes studying me, seeing something that shouldn't have been visible. It was Petra who first noticed the change. "You're jumpy," she observed one evening as we folded linens in the supply room. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, creasing corners with military precision. "Ever since the prince came back, did something else happen?" "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. She gave me a knowing look but didn't push. Petra had been kind to me from the beginning, in the careful way servants learn to be kind, never asking too many questions, never demanding explanations for the shadows that sometimes crossed my face. I wondered what she'd think if she knew the truth. If she knew that before I'd become Celeste the maid, I'd been someone else entirely. Someone trained in combat techniques that most wolves only read about in classified military reports. Someone who'd been recruited at 16 by an organization that didn't officially exist, trained until my body was a weapon and my mind was a trap that never forgot a face, a layout, a weakness. Someone who'd loved the wrong person and paid for it by losing everything. But that was another life, another version of me that I'd buried so deep I sometimes convinced myself she'd never existed at all. "You should be careful," Petra said softly, breaking into my thoughts. "The prince is complicated. His father wants him to settle down, choose a mate from one of the noble families. There's pressure. And when men like him feel pressured, they sometimes look for distractions in inappropriate places." I stiffened. "I'm not—" "I know, dear. I'm just saying, keep your distance, for your own safety." I nodded, but even as I did, I knew it was already too late for that. 3 days after our encounter in his study, I was assigned to serve at a small dinner party the Alpha King was hosting for regional pack leaders. It wasn't my usual duty. I typically worked in the background, never visible to the family or their guests. But one of the regular serving girls had fallen ill, and Mrs. Thornberry's sharp eyes had landed on me. "You'll do," she'd said, her tone suggesting this was both a promotion and a test. "Keep your eyes down, your mouth shut, and don't spill anything. The Alpha King is entertaining the Northern Consolidated Pack. This is important." The dining room was opulent in a way that still sometimes took my breath away, despite 6 months of working here. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across walls covered in silk damask. The table could seat 30, though tonight only 12 places were set. each with enough silverware and crystal to feed a family for a month. I stood against the wall with 3 other servants, waiting to refill glasses and clear plates, trying to blend into the wallpaper. The Alpha King sat at the head of the table, a massive wolf in his 50s, silver threading through his dark hair, his presence so commanding that even sitting still, he seemed to dominate the space. He looked like an older version of his son, but harder, colder, carved from granite rather than flesh. Prince Dominic sat at his right hand, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than civilized. He participated in the conversation with easy confidence, discussing territory disputes and trade agreements with the kind of strategic thinking that marked him as his father's son. The northern pack leaders were rough men, scarred from battles, their manners less polished than the royal families, but their power no less real. They spoke of border incursions, of rogue wolves causing trouble, of the delicate balance between human authorities and pack law. I moved through the room like a ghost, refilling wine glasses, removing plates between courses, never making eye contact, never drawing attention, until one of the northern wolves grabbed my wrist. It was casual, almost unconscious, the way powerful men sometimes touch servants, asserting dominance without thinking. His hand was hot, his grip tight enough to hurt. "You're a pretty little thing," he said, his voice carrying across the table. "What's your name, girl?" My training kicked in automatically. I assessed the threat level, calculated 17 different ways to break his grip and disable him before he could react, noted the exact distance to the exits and the positions of everyone in the room. But I did none of those things. Instead, I dropped my eyes and whispered, "Celeste, sir." "Well, Celeste." He leaned closer, his breath reeking of wine. "Maybe after dinner you could—" "That's enough, Garrett." Prince Dominic's voice cut through the room like a blade, cold and sharp and utterly commanding. The table fell silent. The northern wolf, Garrett, looked up, his hand still on my wrist. "Just having a bit of fun, Your Highness. No harm meant. Release her." It wasn't a request. Garrett's eyes flickered with something dangerous, but after a long moment he let go. I stepped back immediately, my heart pounding, my wrist aching where his fingers had pressed. "Our servants are not entertainment," the prince continued, his tone pleasant but laced with steel. "I'm sure you understand." The Alpha King watched the exchange with hooded eyes, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might contradict his son, reassert the old ways where servants were fair game for whatever amusement the powerful desired. But instead, he nodded slowly. "Dominic is right. We have standards here, gentlemen. Let's remember them." The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. I finished my duties quickly and was dismissed by Mrs. Thornberry, who looked simultaneously relieved and worried. As I left the dining room, I felt eyes on my back. When I glanced over my shoulder, just once, I saw Prince Dominic watching me, that same intense focus from before, as if he were trying to see through the uniform and the submissive posture to whatever lay beneath. I disappeared into the servants' corridors before he could see the way my hands were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of not reacting, of not doing what every instinct screamed at me to do when someone grabbed me like that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness, listening to Petra's gentle snoring, and let myself remember. I'd been 16 when they'd recruited me. A runaway with nothing to lose, and a body that already knew how to fight from years of surviving on the streets. They'd seen potential in me, the kind of potential that couldn't be taught, only refined. For 6 years, I'd been one of their best operatives, silent, deadly, efficient. I'd been assigned to infiltrate a European pack, gather intelligence on their weapons trafficking operation. It was supposed to be simple, in and out, no complications. But then I'd met him, Stefan, the pack leader's younger brother, beautiful and broken, and so desperately lonely that I'd forgotten, just for a moment, that I was there to betray them. I'd fallen in love. Real, stupid, devastating love. And when the operation went south, when my cover was blown and the shooting started, Stefan had thrown himself in front of a bullet meant for me. He'd died in my arms, whispering that he'd known what I was all along, that he'd loved me anyway. I'd barely escaped. The organization had pulled me out, debriefed me, and then made it very clear that I was compromised. Too emotional, too attached, a liability. They'd offered me a choice, disappear completely or disappear permanently. I'd chosen this, a new identity, a new life, a gray existence where I felt nothing, risked nothing, was nothing. It was supposed to be safer this way. But lying in the darkness, my wrist still aching from Garrett's grip, I felt the old rage stirring. The part of me that refused to be touched without permission, that knew exactly how to make men like that regret their casual cruelties. I pressed my palm against the ache in my ribs where the prince had kicked me, and I made myself remember why I was here. Why I'd chosen this. Because the alternative was being hunted by people who didn't tolerate loose ends. Because loving someone had gotten him killed. Because I was tired of being a weapon. The next morning, Mrs. Thornberry pulled me aside before breakfast. "You're being reassigned," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "The prince has requested a personal attendant to help organize his study and manage his correspondence. Someone discreet and efficient." My stomach dropped. "Mrs. Thornberry, it's already decided. You start this afternoon. Don't make me regret recommending you." She walked away before I could protest further. Petra found me in the laundry room an hour later, my hands mechanically folding sheets while my mind raced. "I heard," she said quietly. "Are you frightened?" I wanted to laugh. Frightened? I'd infiltrated terrorist cells, survived interrogations, killed men who'd tried to kill me first. A prince who thought I was just a maid should have been nothing. But somehow, this felt more dangerous than any mission I'd ever undertaken, because Dominic had looked at me and seen something. And if he kept looking, he might see everything. "I'll be fine," I told Petra, forcing a smile. But as I made my way to the prince's study that afternoon, my stomach twisted with an anxiety I hadn't felt in years. The door was open. He stood at the window, still in his training clothes, his posture relaxed but somehow coiled, like a predator resting between hunts. "Celeste," he said without turning around. "Thank you for coming." I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me, and wondered if I was walking into a trap or toward something infinitely more complicated. "You wanted to see me, Your Highness?" He finally turned, and once again, I felt the weight of that amber gaze. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "One I think you'll find interesting." And just like that, I knew my carefully constructed invisible life was about to shatter. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken things. I kept my posture submissive, hands clasped in front of me, eyes respectfully lowered, even as every nerve in my body hummed with alertness. "I need someone I can trust," Prince Dominic said finally, moving away from the window to lean against his desk. The casual posture somehow made him more intimidating, not less. Someone who knows how to be invisible when necessary, but who also has intelligence, discretion. "I'm just a maid, Your Highness. Are you?" His head tilted, that predatory focus sharpening. "You carry yourself like someone with training. Military, perhaps. Or something more specialized." My heart stuttered, but I kept my face blank. "I don't know what you mean." "When Garrett grabbed you last night, your body tensed in a very specific way. Not fear, preparation. Your weight shifted to the balls of your feet. Your free hand moved to a position that would allow for maximum leverage." He paused, watching me. "That's not how civilians react to being grabbed. That's how fighters react." Damn. I'd been so focused on not attacking that I hadn't controlled my initial response. A mistake. A potentially fatal one. I was frightened, I said carefully. "People react differently, too." "Stop." He held up a hand. "I'm not interested in lies. I'm interested in the truth. Who are you, really?" For a long moment, I considered my options. I could continue the charade, play the confused servant, hope he'd lose interest. I could run, disappear into another city, another identity, start over again. Or I could take a calculated risk. "If I tell you," I said slowly, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since entering the room, "what guarantee do I have that information won't be used against me?" Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or satisfaction. "You have my word." Forgive me, Your Highness, but the word of a prince means very little to someone like me. You have everything. I have only my anonymity. If I lose that, I lose everything." He studied me for another long moment, then moved to his desk, pulling out a sheet of official letterhead. He wrote something quickly, signed it, and pressed his seal into the wax. "A contract," he said, handing it to me. "In exchange for your honesty and your service as my personal attendant, you have my protection. Anyone who harms you answers to me personally. Anyone who attempts to expose your past will face the full weight of the crown. This is binding under pack law." I read the document carefully, looking for loopholes, for the catch that had to be there, but it was straightforward, almost brutally simple: protection in exchange for loyalty. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you care?" "Because I've spent 3 years among European courts learning to navigate politics and deception," he said. "And in that time, I've learned to recognize when someone is more than they appear. You interest me, Celeste. You're a puzzle. And I've always been terrible at leaving puzzles unsolved. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly kind. But it was honest. And somehow that mattered more than pretty lies. I made my decision. "My name is Celeste Thorne," I began, using the surname I'd been born with before the organization had stripped it away. "I was recruited at 16 by a private military contractor that specialized in unconventional operations. They trained me in close combat, infiltration, intelligence gathering. For 6 years I worked for them, until a mission went wrong and I became a liability." "What kind of mission?" "The kind where people die." I met his eyes steadily. "The kind where falling in love gets you burned." Understanding flickered across his face. "You were compromised. I fell for someone I was supposed to be surveilling. When it all went to hell, he saved my life and lost his own. The organization gave me a choice: disappear or be disappeared. So I became a maid in your father's house, where no one looks twice at servants. And I've been invisible ever since, until I kicked you in that corridor." A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "Until you kicked me in that corridor." He was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Show me." "Show you what?" "Your training. I want to see what you can do." I hesitated. The part of me that had spent 6 months being carefully, deliberately weak, balked at the idea. But another part, the part I'd been suppressing, felt a surge of something almost like relief. "Here?" I asked. "The private training room. No one else uses it. No one will see." 20 minutes later, I stood in a large room with padded floors, weapons racks along one wall, and mirrors covering another. Dominic had changed into training gear, and I'd been given simple clothes that allowed for movement. The first time in 6 months I'd worn anything other than that shapeless uniform. "Don't hold back," he said, moving to the center of the mat. "I need to know what I'm working with." "You want me to fight you?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. He was bigger, stronger, an alpha wolf with all the supernatural advantages that implied. "I want you to try." Something in his tone, a challenge maybe, or a test, sparked the old competitive fire I'd thought I'd extinguished. "Your funeral," I muttered. We began slowly, circling each other. He moved well, I noted, better than most wolves I'd encountered. His training had been extensive, probably from childhood. He knew how to use his size and strength efficiently, but I knew how to fight wolves. He lunged first, testing my reactions. I sidestepped, using his momentum against him, my hand finding the pressure point on his wrist that would have made him drop a weapon if he'd been holding one. His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected that speed. We continued, the pace increasing gradually. He was strong and fast, but I was faster. I'd been trained to fight opponents bigger and stronger than myself, trained to turn their advantages into vulnerabilities. Within minutes, I'd put him on the mat twice, not through strength, but through technique, through understanding exactly how to disrupt balance and exploit openings. The second time he went down, he stayed there for a moment, breathing hard, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "Everywhere. My instructors pulled from every fighting tradition they could find. Military combatives, traditional martial arts, street fighting techniques, whatever worked." I offered him a hand up, which he took. The goal was efficiency, how to disable threats quickly with minimum risk. You could have seriously hurt Garrett last night. I could have broken his wrist in 3 places before anyone at that table could have blinked, I said flatly. But that would have defeated the purpose of being invisible. He studied me with that same intense focus, but now there was something else in it, respect, maybe, or a reevaluation of everything he thought he knew. I need someone like you, he said finally. My father is grooming me to take over as Alpha King, but there are complications. Rival packs who see me as inexperienced. Nobles within our own pack who think I'm too young, too progressive. I need intelligence. I need to know who my real allies are and who's waiting for the right moment to strike. You want me to spy for you. I want you to be my eyes and ears in places I can't reach. Servants see everything, hear everything. But most servants don't have the training to understand what they're seeing or the ability to defend themselves if discovered. He paused. I need someone who can do both. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of thing I'd sworn I'd never do again. But it was also a way out of the gray half-life I'd been living. What about your father? I asked. Does he know you're recruiting former operatives as house staff? My father doesn't need to know everything I do. There was an edge to his voice, something that suggested tension between them. Will you help me? I should have said no. Should have walked away. Found another house. Another city. Another identity. But I was tired of being invisible. Tired of pretending to be weak. And despite everything, I was curious about this prince who apologized to servants and saw through carefully constructed facades. Yes, I said, but on my terms. I work alone. I report only to you, and if I think you're using me the way they did, as a disposable asset, I disappear. You'll never find me. Agreed. He held out his hand, and after a moment, I shook it. His grip was firm, warm, and somehow the gesture felt more binding than the contract he'd written earlier. Over the following weeks, I settled into my new role. Publicly, I was still Prince Dominic's personal attendant, organizing his schedule, managing his correspondence, keeping his spaces organized. But privately, I became his intelligence network. I listened to servant gossip and translated it into actionable information. The butler who was meeting secretly with representatives from a rival pack. The visiting noble whose questions about security were too specific, too pointed. The pattern of supply deliveries that suggested someone was skimming from the royal coffers. I also trained with Dominic most mornings, before the rest of the household was awake. He was a quick study, absorbing techniques I showed him, pushing himself hard enough that I occasionally had to remind him that injury would raise questions. You're relentless, I observed one morning after a particularly intense session. We sat on the edge of the mat, both breathing hard, sweat cooling on skin. I have to be. He took a long drink from his water bottle. My father's enemies are looking for any sign of weakness. If I'm going to lead this pack, I need to be better than good. I need to be formidable. You already are, I said without thinking. He glanced at me, something shifting in his expression. Coming from you, that actually means something. The air between us felt suddenly charged, heavy with an awareness that hadn't been there before. I became acutely conscious of how close we were sitting, of the way his breathing matched mine, of the intensity in those amber eyes when they met mine. I stood abruptly. I should go. Mrs. Thornberry will wonder where I am. Celeste. I'll have my report on the northern border situation ready by this afternoon, I said, already moving toward the door, needing distance from whatever had just shifted between us. Because this was exactly what had gotten me compromised before, exactly what had gotten Stefan killed. I couldn't afford to feel anything beyond professional obligation. I wouldn't survive it a second time, but as I showered and dressed in my uniform, my hands shaking slightly as I tied back my hair, I knew it was already too late. I was starting to care, and in my world, caring was the most dangerous thing you could do. The first real test came 3 weeks after I'd started working directly for Dominic. The Alpha King announced a formal gathering, a summit, really, bringing together leaders from 7 major packs to discuss territorial agreements and the increasing tension with human authorities who were becoming more aware of supernatural activity. It was political theater on a massive scale, with dozens of visiting wolves, their entourages, and enough ego and dominance posturing to make the estate feel like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Dominic had been tense for days leading up to it, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. His father expected him to shine, to prove he was ready for leadership. The visiting alphas would be watching for any weakness, any sign that the crown prince wasn't worthy of the title he'd inherit. And I would be there, serving wine and clearing plates, invisible among dozens of other servants while my real job was to watch, listen, and identify threats. The night of the summit, the grand ballroom blazed with light. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with silk and gold. The air thrummed with power. So many dominant wolves in one space created an almost physical pressure that made my teeth ache. I moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, my serving tray balanced perfectly, my movements economical and forgettable. But my eyes missed nothing. The Western Pack Alpha spent too much time talking to the Southern Beta, their conversation stopping abruptly whenever anyone came near. The Eastern delegation kept their distance from everyone else, their body language defensive, isolated. And there was a woman, striking with dark hair and predatory grace, who watched Dominic with an intensity that made my instincts flare with warning. She was introduced as Vivian Blackthorne, daughter of the Northern Consolidated Alpha. The same pack that Garrett belonged to, though thankfully he wasn't present tonight. Vivian was everything I wasn't. Polished, powerful, beautiful in the way that made men stupid. And she wanted the prince. That much was obvious from the way she positioned herself near him, the way her hand lingered on his arm when they spoke, the way she laughed at things that weren't funny. I told myself the sick feeling in my stomach was professional concern. That I was worried about her as a potential security risk, nothing more. I was lying to myself, and I knew it. Halfway through the evening, I was refilling glasses near where Dominic stood with his father and several visiting alphas. The conversation was political, carefully neutral, but I caught the undercurrent of challenge in the Western alpha's tone. "Your son has been away for some time," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We're all curious to see if his European education has made him soft." The Alpha King's expression didn't change, but I felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "My son is more than capable. He'll prove that in due time." "Of course," another alpha chimed in, his tone oily with false congeniality. Though one wonders if book learning is sufficient preparation for the realities of pack leadership. Perhaps a demonstration? We've all brought our best fighters. A friendly exhibition could be enlightening. It was a trap. If Dominic declined, he'd look weak. If he accepted and lost, he'd look incompetent. And there was no guarantee the fights would remain friendly. Accidents happened, especially when dominance and pride were involved. I saw the calculation flash across Dominic's face, saw him weighing options, none of them good. "An excellent idea," the Alpha King said smoothly, "though perhaps we should make it more interesting. Not just strength, but strategy. A series of challenges, combat, yes, but also puzzle solving, endurance, tactics. True leadership requires more than just the ability to win a fight." The visiting alphas exchanged glances. They hadn't expected that counter move. "And to make it fair," the Alpha King continued, "each pack may enter one champion, including ours, of course." "I'll represent our pack," Dominic said immediately, his voice steady despite the obvious trap being set. "Nonsense," his father said, waving a hand dismissively. "You're hosting. It would be poor form. We'll select another champion." I saw Dominic's jaw tighten, saw him realize his father had just undermined him in front of everyone. This wasn't about fairness. This was about reminding Dominic that he wasn't in charge yet, that his father still made the decisions. The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. The other alphas had seen the dynamic, seen the weakness in the Crown Prince's position. I finished my circuit and slipped away to a quiet corridor, pulling out the small phone Dominic had given me, untraceable, encrypted. For emergencies only. I typed quickly, "Your father just boxed you in. Champions tournament tomorrow. He's not letting you fight. Undermined your authority in front of everyone." The response came within seconds. "I know. Meet me in the training room. 1 hour." When I arrived, he was already there, pacing like a caged animal, his formal jacket discarded, his shirt partially unbuttoned. He looked furious and frustrated, and younger than his 24 years. He's doing this on purpose, Dominic said without preamble, reminding everyone that I'm still just the heir, not the alpha. That I have no real power yet. Who's he choosing as champion? I asked. Marcus Chen. Good fighter, loyal, but not exceptional. My father knows that. He's not trying to win. He's trying to teach me a lesson about patience, about waiting my turn. He slammed his hand against the wall, the sound echoing in the empty room. I'm so tired of waiting. I understood that feeling. I'd spent 6 months waiting, being invisible, suppressing everything I was. An idea formed, reckless and dangerous, and absolutely insane. What if you did fight? I said slowly. He turned to look at me. He'll never allow it. I didn't say you should fight as yourself. I took a breath. You need a champion who can win, who'll make you look good by association, but who isn't obviously connected to you. Someone unexpected. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by rejection. No, absolutely not. You'll be exposed. If they find out, they won't. I moved closer, my mind already working through the logistics. I'll be masked, identity concealed, just another fighter. You can claim I'm from a minor pack family, someone you've been training in secret. It's not uncommon for nobles to sponsor fighters. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than letting your father's champion lose and making you look weak by association, I countered. More dangerous than giving those other alphas ammunition to use against you when they inevitably challenge your right to lead. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him turning it over, seeing the angles, the risks, the potential benefits. If you're discovered, he said finally, if they realize what you are, you'll be questioned. They'll want to know who trained you, who you've worked for. It could expose everything. I know. Why would you take that risk, for me? It was a good question. One I wasn't sure I wanted to answer honestly, even to myself. Because I'm tired of hiding, I said instead. Because I'm good at this, and I'm tired of pretending to be helpless. And because... I hesitated, then pushed forward. Because you gave me a choice when no one else has. That means something. The air between us felt charged again, heavy with things neither of us was willing to name. If we do this, he said slowly, you follow my lead completely. No improvisation. No risks I haven't approved. Agreed? Agreed. And Celeste? His voice was softer now, almost gentle. Don't get hurt. I'm not sure I could forgive myself if something happened to you. My heart did something complicated in my chest, but I pushed the feeling down. I've survived worse than a few dominance fights. The next morning, the announcement was made. The tournament would take place that afternoon in the estate's outdoor arena. 7 champions, 1 from each pack, competing in 3 challenges: single combat, a tactical obstacle course, and a strategic puzzle that would test their ability to think under pressure. Dominic's champion was announced last. Celeste Thorne, sponsored fighter from a minor branch family. I saw the curiosity ripple through the crowd, saw Vivian's eyes narrow with interest. Saw the Alpha King's expression remain carefully neutral, though I caught the slight tension in his jaw that suggested Dominic's choice had surprised him. In the preparation area, I wrapped my hands carefully, methodically, the ritual soothing my nerves. I wore simple black training gear and a mask that covered the upper half of my face, enough to conceal my identity while still allowing full range of movement. The other champions were all male, all large, all radiating confidence and dominance. They looked at me with everything from amusement to dismissive contempt. A female fighter was unusual. A small one was practically a joke. Let them underestimate me. I'd built a career on being underestimated. The first challenge was single combat, one-on-one fights, elimination style. I was matched against the Eastern Pack's champion first, a massive wolf named Victor, who looked like he could bench press a car. We faced each other in the center of the arena, surrounded by hundreds of watching wolves, their combined attention like a physical weight. I breathed through my nerves, let my training take over, felt my body settle into the familiar readiness. Victor smiled, showing teeth. I'll try not to hurt you too badly, little girl. I didn't respond. Words were wasted energy. The signal came, and he charged. All strength and aggression, exactly what I'd expected. I waited until the last possible second. then moved. His fist met empty air where I'd been standing. My elbow found the nerve cluster in his ribs. My foot swept his ankle at the precise moment his weight was transitioning. He went down hard, confusion flashing across his face. He got up quickly, more cautious now. We circled each other. He was strong, but strength meant nothing if you couldn't land a hit. I stayed just outside his range, letting him tire himself out with attacks that missed by inches. When he overextended, and he would, they always did, I was there, exploiting the opening, targeting vulnerabilities. 3 minutes in, I had him on the ground with my arm locked around his throat, his airway compressed just enough to make him tap out. The crowd's roar was deafening. I helped Victor up, offered him the respect of a fellow fighter. He looked stunned, but not angry. There was recognition in his eyes, the acknowledgement of someone who understood combat. I won my next 2 fights with similar efficiency. The other champions stopped smiling, stopped dismissing me. By the time I reached the finals, facing off against the Western Pac's champion, a seasoned fighter named Cole who actually knew what he was doing, the atmosphere had shifted. This wasn't funny anymore. This was serious. Cole was good. Better than good. He'd studied my earlier fights, identified patterns, adjusted his strategy. We went back and forth for nearly 10 minutes, both of us landing hits, both of us refusing to yield. My ribs ached where he'd gotten through my guard. My lip was split, but I'd opened a cut above his eye, compromised his left knee. We were both exhausted, both running on determination and pride. And then I saw it, the slight hesitation in his footwork, the tell that he was about to commit to a power move that would either end the fight or leave him vulnerable. I feinted left. He took the bait, and I was inside his guard before he could adjust. My strike to his solar plexus was precise, calculated to disable without serious injury. He went down, gasping, and didn't get back up before the count finished. The arena erupted. I stood there, breathing hard, my mask damp with sweat, my body screaming, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Alive, powerful, visible. I found Dominic's eyes in the crowd. He was standing with his father, his expression carefully controlled, but I saw the pride there, the satisfaction. I'd just made him look very, very good, and in doing so, I'd stepped fully into the light. There was no going back to invisible now. The victory celebration was supposed to be dignified, formal, a polite acknowledgement of athletic prowess and pack politics. But the atmosphere in the grand hall that evening crackled with something more volatile. I'd been whisked away immediately after the tournament, cleaned up and dressed in formal servant's attire once more, my mask removed, my identity as Dominic's sponsored fighter officially separate from my role as his attendant. It was a thin fiction, one that wouldn't hold up under serious scrutiny, but for now, it served its purpose. The visiting alphas were grudgingly impressed. I'd overheard conversations as I moved through the hall, speculation about where Dominic had found such a fighter, what it meant for his strategic thinking. Whether this indicated he was more formidable than they'd assumed. The Alpha King was harder to read. He watched his son with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, pride mixed with something else. Concern, perhaps, or calculation. Vivian Blackthorne, however, was openly hostile. I was refilling glasses near where she stood with Dominic when her voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp and sweet as poisoned honey. "Your little champion is quite impressive," she said, her hand possessively on Dominic's arm, though one wonders about the appropriateness of a prince sponsoring fighters from such obscure backgrounds. Some might question your judgment. "My judgment won 7 victories today," Dominic replied smoothly. "I'm comfortable with that outcome." "Still, it's all rather mysterious, isn't it?" Her eyes found me across the room, even though I was technically just another servant. "Where did she come from? What's her story? Surely you vetted her thoroughly before putting your reputation behind her performance." There was something in her tone that made my instincts flare. This wasn't just jealousy or political maneuvering. This was a threat. I finished my task and moved away, but I felt her gaze following me like a blade pressed against skin. Later that night, after the guests had retired and the hall was being cleaned, I went to Dominic's study to deliver my nightly report. I found him at his desk, still in his formal clothes but with his jacket discarded, his tie loosened, looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. "Vivian knows something," I said without preamble, "or suspects something. The way she was probing tonight, that wasn't casual curiosity." He nodded slowly. "Her father's pack has connections to several private military contractors. It's possible she recognized your fighting style, made connections. Then we need to end this arrangement, before she digs deeper and finds something that compromises both of us. No." He stood, moving around the desk to face me directly. "We double down. Tomorrow, I'm announcing you as my personal guard, officially. It'll explain your presence, your access, your skills. It'll also put you under my direct protection in a way that even my father can't easily challenge." "That's insane. Personal guards are always male, always from noble families, always exactly what people expect," he interrupted. "Which is why no one will see you coming. Which is why you'll be more effective than any traditional guard could be." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "And which is why I want you in that position. Not just for strategy, because I trust you." The words hung between us, heavy with implication. "Dominic, I know this complicates things," he said quietly. "I know we agreed this was professional. But somewhere between training sessions and intelligence reports and watching you fight today like you were born to it, this stopped being just business for me." My heart was pounding, my carefully constructed walls crumbling. This is exactly what I swore I wouldn't do. Getting involved, caring about someone in this world, it ends badly. It always ends badly. Maybe. He stepped closer, his voice soft but intent. Or maybe you've been punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. You didn't get Stefan killed, Celeste. He made a choice to save you because he loved you. That's not weakness. That's not something you should spend the rest of your life atoning for. How did he know Stefan's name? I'd never mentioned it. He saw my confusion. You talk in your sleep sometimes. During those early morning training sessions, when you'd doze off for a few minutes after, you'd whisper his name, apologize to him. His hand lifted, hesitating just inches from my face. You've been haunting yourself with a ghost who would want you to live, not hide. Tears burned behind my eyes, years of suppressed grief rising up. I don't know how to do this. Be visible. Be vulnerable. Be something other than a weapon or a ghost. Then we'll figure it out together. His hand finally made contact, cupping my cheek with a gentleness that undid me completely. I'm not asking you to stop being strong. I'm asking you to stop being alone. I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch, letting myself feel something other than fear for the first time in what felt like forever. And then the door burst open. We sprang apart instantly, but not fast enough. The Alpha King stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous, with Vivian just behind him, her smile triumphant. "Well," the Alpha King said, his voice deadly calm. "This explains quite a bit." The next hour was brutal. The Alpha King dismissed Vivian, despite her protests, and then proceeded to interrogate me with the kind of methodical ruthlessness that explained exactly how he'd held power for 3 decades. Who had I worked for? What operations had I been involved in? What was my real purpose in his house? Was I an assassin, sent to kill his son? A spy for rival packs? I answered truthfully, Dominic vouching for me at every turn, explaining how he'd discovered my background, how he'd recruited me, what I'd been doing for him. When I finished, the Alpha King was silent for a long moment. His amber eyes, so like his son's, fixed on me with an intensity that made me want to vanish. "You've put my son in an impossible position," he said finally. "If this becomes public, if other packs discover he's been fraternizing with a servant, using a former operative as an intelligence asset, the political damage could be catastrophic." "Then let me leave," I said quietly. "I'll disappear. No one needs to know anything." "No." Dominic's voice was hard as steel. "She stays. And if necessary, I'll announce our relationship publicly. Let them talk. I don't care." "You should care," his father snapped. "You're the crown prince. Your choices affect the entire pack. This girl, this woman," Dominic corrected sharply, "has more honor, more courage, more strategic intelligence than half the noble-born wolves you want me to ally with. She won that tournament today. She's proven her worth a dozen times over. And I'm not giving her up to satisfy political optics. Father and son stared at each other, the room crackling with dominance and will. Finally, the Alpha King sighed, suddenly looking older. You're more like me than I thought. Stubborn. Willing to fight for what you want, damn the consequences. He turned to me. I'm not happy about this, but I'm not a fool. You're an asset, whether I like how my son acquired you or not. So here's what's going to happen. He laid out his terms. I would indeed become Dominic's official personal guard, but I would also undergo formal evaluation by the royal security detail to prove I was qualified. My past would be sealed under royal decree. Anyone who attempted to expose it would face charges of treason, and Dominic and I would be discreet. At least until he'd solidified his political position enough that our relationship wouldn't be used against him. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than I'd expected, more than I dared hope for. The evaluation took place over 3 days and was designed to break me. Combat trials against the king's best guards, intelligence tests, psychological evaluations, endurance challenges that left me bruised and exhausted. I passed everything. The captain of the royal guard, a grizzled wolf named Davison, who'd initially been openly hostile to the idea of a female guard, shook my hand at the end with grudging respect. You're good, he admitted. Unorthodox as hell, but good. Welcome to the detail. The formal announcement was made at a small ceremony. I stood beside Dominic in a uniform that had been specially made. My hair pulled back severely, my expression professional. The visiting alphas had mostly departed, but enough remained to witness and spread word. Vivian was there, her expression cold and calculating. She cornered me afterward, when I was alone for a moment. You think you've won, she said softly, but you're just a novelty, a distraction. When he needs to make a real political alliance, when he needs to choose a queen who can actually help him rule, you'll be discarded. Enjoy it while it lasts. She walked away before I could respond, leaving poison in her wake. I tried not to let her words burrow under my skin, but they did. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. I was a servant, a former operative with a past that could resurface at any time. Dominic would eventually need to marry someone appropriate, someone who brought political advantage. Where would that leave me? But then Dominic found me on the balcony where I'd retreated, and he didn't say anything, just pulled me into his arms and held me while I finally let myself cry. For Stefan. For everything I'd lost. For the impossible situation I'd fallen into. I can't promise this will be easy. He murmured against my hair. But I can promise I'm not giving up on you. On us. Whatever that looks like. Your father will expect you to marry politically, I said, my voice muffled against his chest. Then I'll change the rules. He pulled back enough to look at me, his expression fierce. I'm going to be Alpha King someday. That means I get to decide what's acceptable. And I decide that the woman who saved my political reputation, who's proven herself a dozen times over, who makes me want to be better than I am, she's acceptable. More than acceptable. She's everything. He kissed me then, soft and careful and full of promise, and I let myself believe just for a moment that maybe this could work. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance. Publicly, I was his guard. Professional, competent, always 3 steps behind and watching for threats. Privately, we carved out moments together, learning each other in the quiet hours before dawn, building something real beneath the political facade. I continued gathering intelligence, but now I had official authority to investigate, to ask questions, to protect Dominic from threats both external and internal. I uncovered 2 plots against him in the first month alone, one from within his own pack, nobles who thought him too progressive, and another from a rival pack who saw his youth as weakness. Each victory strengthened his position, proved his value to his father, shifted the political landscape. And somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a ghost in my own life. 6 months after the tournament, Dominic made his move. At a gathering of the pack's noble families with his father present, he announced changes to the succession laws, including provisions that would allow the future Alpha King to choose his queen based on merit and compatibility rather than purely political considerations. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. There was resistance, of course, angry voices insisting on tradition. But there was also support, especially from younger wolves who saw in Dominic's reforms a path to a more flexible, modern pack structure. His father said nothing during the debate, but afterward, in private, he pulled me aside. "You've made my son into a better leader than I could have," he said gruffly. "I still don't like this situation, but I respect what you've done with it. Just take care of him. He's more fragile than he lets on." "I know," I said softly. "So am I." He nodded, something like understanding passing between us. That night, alone in Dominic's private chambers, he held my hand and asked me a question I'd never expected to hear. "When I become Alpha King," he said, "I want you beside me. Not as a guard, not as an operative, as my queen. I know it's complicated. I know there will be challenges, but I can't imagine facing this future with anyone else." I looked at him, this prince who'd seen through my disguises, who'd given me back myself, who'd fought for me when I'd forgotten how to fight for myself. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." We married quietly, a private ceremony with only his father and a few trusted witnesses. The formal public announcement delayed until after his coronation. It wasn't traditional, but nothing about us was. 2 years later, when Dominic took the crown and I stood beside him as his queen, there were still whispers, still those who questioned my worthiness. But there were also those who saw in our story something worth believing in, that strength came in unexpected forms, that love could transcend tradition, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was choose your own path. I never forgot where I came from, the training, the losses, the years of hiding. But I stopped letting those things define me. Stefan's memory became something I honored rather than something I atoned for. My past became a source of strength rather than shame. And on quiet mornings, when I trained with the Royal Guard or worked with Dominic on the complex politics of pack leadership, I sometimes caught my reflection and saw not a ghost, not a weapon, not a servant hiding in plain sight. Just a woman who'd learned that being visible, being vulnerable, being fully alive was the bravest thing she'd ever done. And it was enough. It was everything.